Hey there, I'm Dr. Karen, and I am so excited to have you here with me today. In this session, I'm going to show you how to make your clinical expertise scalable so that you can go from being a skilled clinician to an impactful leader. Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited that you're here. Today, we are talking about the three shifts that turn your clinical expertise into a scalable language therapy system. I am Karen Dudek-Brannan, and I will be your host for today. Just a couple quick housekeeping things. Make sure that you turn off all other streaming devices in your household so that you have a good connection. And please feel free to type questions in the chat on this page throughout the presentation. But also, if you are watching a pre-recorded version of this presentation, I will be checking questions via email and will do my best to answer your questions within 24 to 48 hours of watching this presentation. And then also a full disclaimer, this presentation is free, but I will be giving you an opportunity to learn more about one of my paid programs at the end of this presentation for those of you who want to learn more. And if you have follow-up questions about that, you can email me at drkarenspeech@gmail.com, especially if you have questions about getting a purchase order for your district or anything like that. But what you can do now is make sure that you have a piece of paper to take notes because I'm really excited to share this with you. This has been a game changer for me in my career. So these habits and practices that I'm going to share in this presentation are what I used to create my frameworks for language therapy. I've also used them for frameworks for executive functioning, and I use them in so many different ways in my life, not just in work, but in a lot of my other life habits like health, fitness, sleep, relationships, all of the things. And what you'll find is that these practices will not just make you a better clinician, they will also make you a better leader, which really both of those things go together. This presentation is for you if you are a school SLP or some other kind of professional who is involved in language intervention or language therapy in some way. Chances are you're a good therapist, you probably have good clinical skills, and you're to the point that you can plan on the fly and pull off a decent session, which, by the way, is not half-assing. It just means that you're good at your job and you're good at developing automaticity for some of your protocols that you do. So maybe you're getting by using on the fly or planning session to session, but you don't just want to get by, you want to excel for yourself and your students, and you know you're not operating in a way that's the most efficient. So you probably have a lot of tools in your toolkit when it comes to language therapy and literacy, but your strategies aren't organized in a way that makes planning seamless. And maybe you've been doing this for a while and you think you should have it figured out by now. Maybe you've been searching for something like a language therapy curriculum. Believe me, I was there myself as well. So you want a curriculum or something like it, but it just feels elusive. You feel like it's just on the tip of your tongue. Those ideas are floating around in your head, but you can't fully organize or see them and make that vision or that idea of this language therapy system come to fruition so you can be more efficient and effective and operate at your highest potential. And part of the reason that you may want that system is because you want planning to be more efficient. It takes so much time. Yes, you get it done, you get results, your students can get some gains in sessions, and you see them making connections because you know how to scaffold. And you also know that you should be doing a lot of other things to facilitate generalization, which is a problem for language therapy when you've got those skills that students need throughout the day, but you can't be with them throughout the day. And as a result, you know you should be collaborating. You've heard experts when you go to PD say, we should be collaborating more as a profession. We should be doing multiple service delivery models. We should be doing co-teaching or getting into classrooms more. But you're not sure how that should look in practice, and your capacity is consumed by planning for direct sessions and paperwork. So you don't even have the brain power to think about how collaboration might look so that you can get to that next level in your practice and make an impact on your team, but most importantly, your students. And you know you have it in you. You know you could impact school-wide practices because you do have a lot of knowledge relating to language and literacy, but you often feel like you're working in a system that doesn't allow you to deliver quality services because you're pulled in so many different directions. And you know you should be advocating for some changes, but again, that feels kind of overwhelming and vague. And let's be honest, when we get into advocacy, especially when we're talking about how advocacy happens online, a lot of times there's a lot of drama and debates, and it's just a lot. So you've got all these great ideas in your head. But that's the problem. They're in your head, which means that your impact stops when your therapy sessions end, which means those wins that you're seeing in sessions with students from all that amazing scaffolding that you know how to do don't generalize. They don't generalize because you're good at your job, but you've become somewhat of a bottleneck. So I certainly understand this problem. I used to feel the same way when I was in the schools. So, like I said before, I'm Dr. Karen. I am a speech language pathologist by training. I started in the field back in the early 2000s, and I started my career by spending 14 years in the school system supporting students with language, literacy, and executive functioning needs and helping teams develop systems. That last one is important because I started off really focusing on direct intervention, but I quickly realized, especially when my team was implementing response to intervention, my team needed my expertise and I needed to find a way to perform well in those direct sessions and deliver high quality therapy, but also share my knowledge with my team so that I could make sure that there were good things happening in the classroom too, and that the whole system was working around my services, which really inspired my doctoral work where I focused on language and literacy and came up with the system that I'm going to share with you today that I used to deliver language intervention while I was in the schools that I have taught to thousands of other SLPs. I also run an online education company where I help service-based professionals like speech pathologists and other related service providers build systems that make their therapy more impactful and their expertise scalable. And specifically, I focus on language and executive functioning and leadership as well. And on top of that, I also work as a state administrator in child welfare. So I also have that macro level experience that I can bring to the table that really goes along with that concept of scalability and making an impact not just at that micro level in those direct therapy sessions, but also how you can get the entire system to work together well. Back when I was in the schools, I was getting a lot of referrals for students who needed some kind of vocabulary intervention, but it was very clear that I not only needed to have a good system for my direct intervention, but I also needed a way to package and explain that to other people so that I could be efficient, but also some things that could be done in the general education curriculum. And since then, I have been able to put them into my Language Therapy Advanced Foundations program with a framework that I refer to as the Essential Five that gives SLPs a system for language therapy. And as I said before, I've been able to teach that to thousands of SLPs who've been able to use this system for many different ways, mostly in the school systems. But the most important thing is that it gives them that clarity they need to feel confident in their interventions and also to impact their practice for the rest of their career. I'm known for my no fluff minimalist approach that allows you to use materials but doesn't require you to use a lot of stuff. And as we get into that concept of scalability, you'll see why it's important to have that skill to be able to come up with a good therapy session and package it and share it with others without a lot of complicated materials and setup. So if you've been searching for that elusive system that's going to help you put your students in a place where they have those language and literacy skills they need for school and life, but also make sure that the systems are in place to support those skills outside your sessions. Why haven't you figured this out by now? Because you have a lot of skills and knowledge. Well, part of it is that you're looking for something that doesn't exist that you don't need. You might be saying to yourself, I need a language therapy curriculum. But under the surface, what you're really saying is, I hate feeling like I'm not as successful as I could be as a clinician, and I want to excel without burning out. So maybe you know how to excel, but it takes a lot out of you. And you know how to take breaks, but then your challenges are still waiting for you on Monday morning, and you feel like you're letting your students and your team down. So maybe you've tried some things that have worked a little bit, but haven't quite gotten you where you want to go. So maybe you're collecting materials, hoping one will give you clarity, but nothing fits. Or with this whole vision of your language therapy system, you might keep stopping and starting because sometimes you get a wave of inspiration, but you never get past that initial phase and see it to the end. And you keep defaulting back to your old habit of planning session to session and cobbling things together, especially when life gets busy, which it inevitably always does. So if this sounds familiar and you do cycle through moments of inspiration and loving your job, but often also feel kind of burnt out, I wanted to ask you a couple clarifying questions for you to reflect on. Have you ever felt pleasantly exhausted after doing something hard that was successful? Think about that. So, here's an example of something that I did. So, I am at the top of Angel's Landing. That is, if you Google it, it will say it's the scariest hike in North America. It is terrifying, but also exhilarating, and was one of the best days of that vacation. Probably one of the most memorable hikes I've been on. And I was pretty tired afterward. You have to hike up 2 miles of switchbacks to even get to the point where you're hiking up the scary part. But it was very satisfying. So, yes, I was tired, but it felt good. This is very different from how I feel after having too much pizza and beer, where, yes, it's fun at the time, but I've overindulged and I usually have profound regret afterwards. So, this is a really important analogy with the way we talk about professional burnout and how you feel about your job and just your motivation to come up with these complicated systems that you need to do, especially when you're working on something like language that doesn't have a clear-cut way to address it. A lot of times when people talk about burnout, it's, oh, go take a walk, take a break, treat yourself, which are all fine things to do. But I would challenge the notion that it's just about burnout and overwork. Because how motivated do you feel to do something that's hard when your efforts don't make a difference? If you sometimes get frustrated with your job, you're not burnt out, you're bored. Ambitious people seek out struggle because if something feels too easy, they get restless. But if something feels unproductive, you'll also disengage because you like the satisfaction of moving through the struggle. So it's not just about making things easy, it's about being able to work through that learning curve and have it be the right amount of hard that it's interesting and challenging, but also there's this possibility of success. You can see that goal ahead of you and move towards it. And chances are you've been stopping and starting with this idea of a language therapy system because you can't quite see that end goal. The solutions that you've been given or that you've tried haven't gotten you there. And the bad news is that you won't find what you're looking for in that done for you curriculum. And you do have to go through the struggle of building your system. So I don't have a pre-made print and go, here's all the stuff that you need. You can just log into a portal and, not think about what you're going to be doing in your sessions and just have it at the end of the day today. So that's the bad news. But the good news is there's a happy medium between that cookie cutter curriculum and the start from scratch for each student that you end up doing when you don't have a good system. And the even better news is that this struggle is temporary. It will be the invigorating, pleasantly exhausted kind of struggle. It's a learning curve for you, not a roadblock. That means you'll get stronger after, and you'll have those skills that you can use to share with other people and benefit your students and yourself. So this time with the right system, you can move through it instead of repeating that stop and start cycle. And the good news, and we know this from learning science, is that when you struggle with a certain skill, your retention of those skills is actually better. We know this for our students, but of course, it's true for you as well. And here's me with my dad after I went through one of those very important learning curves of developing this system that I'm going to share with you today. That's me when I graduated with my doctorate in special ed, which is when I really studied language literacy and metacognition and deepened my knowledge while I was working in the schools practicing with students. So, what we'll go over today are the three practices or the three shifts. So we'll start by talking about how to define your clinical containers that keep your intervention research informed and scalable. So finding that happy medium between giving you something that can be customized, that's not cookie cutter, but still has consistent practices embedded in it so that you know you're aligned with research. So it's not a free for all, but it's also not a start from scratch or something rigid and cookie cutter either. You're strategically stacking assets, habits, and practices to fill your scalable clinical containers. This idea of stacking is going to help you both organize what you have, but also layer in additional things because chances are you don't have capacity to focus beyond your direct therapy sessions. This is going to help you solve that problem, which leads us to practice number 3. So first we define our clinical containers, then we stack things and use that stacking method to fill those containers. And we have to carve out asset stacking time. And the way that we do that is developing our master plan that creates that protected time to make sure this does not get put on the back burner, even if life gets busy. The secret is not waiting until you have time. The secret is finding a way to have time regardless of how crazy your schedule gets. So let's move on to the first practice, which is creating those containers. So let's start by talking about what needs to happen for you to not feel burnt out and for you to feel satisfied in your work. Well, you need to feel successful as a clinician, and you need to be able to get there without overworking. The next thing that needs to happen in order for you to feel successful is that your students need to be successful. You can't feel successful if you don't feel like you're making an impact. But for your students to be successful, they need support with generalization. Again, you can make a big impact with your direct therapy sessions, but you're always going to hit a wall if you don't also have systems in place that support generalization. And in order to get that generalization so that your students can be successful, so that you can feel successful and excited about your work, other people need to be facilitating language, not just you. And then, in order for those things to happen, in order for other people to know how to facilitate language, they need to have the tools and the skills to do it. So, for that to happen, you need a mechanism for transferring the knowledge and skills in your brain to theirs. And if you want to have some kind of a mechanism to share your knowledge and skills, you need the capacity to develop those tools and processes to do knowledge transfer, to get that information out of your head and share it with other people. But in order to create that capacity and those tools and processes, you need to define and package a version of what you're doing in therapy. Because otherwise, if you carve out some time to work on things, you're not going to know what to work on. Because what will happen is that you will carve out a time slot and then you'll end up doing something that isn't productive. Checking your email, scrolling social media, whatever you do when you have a free time and you're not really sure how to use it. So, in order to create that clarity, so you know what to do with your protected time when you find a way to block it out, is that you need a framework that helps you define and package those techniques so that you can efficiently plan those direct sessions, so that you can create that space to think about other service delivery models like coaching and consultation. So we do start with direct intervention to make sure that your planning is effective and efficient. But then we also need to add the other layer of creating scalable versions of your strategies with assets that help you easily train others to do them. So you're not solely relying on you explaining yourself over and over again. Scalable simply means something can be packaged and repeated across people and systems. And if things aren't clearly defined and packaged, then they are going to stay in your therapy room and no one else is going to benefit from them. So let's talk about why it's hard for you to package and define right now. Well, like I said before, you probably have a lot of good tools in your toolkit, but they're not easily organized into nice little uh, files or organizers. And I mean that literally and figuratively. So maybe you're working on a lot of things in language therapy, and they're good things to be working on, but they're not organized into a clear system that's easy for you to plan without taking up a lot of your time and mental energy. And they're certainly not easy to explain to other people if you had to describe your system so that you could train somebody else. And this could be, when I say train other people, this could be a lot of things. It could be training your coworkers, which is what I'm going to talk a lot about today, but this is also really beneficial for training parents. So if you're in private practice, the layer that you want to be thinking about is that parent training. And honestly, everybody should be thinking about how they could share their information with families as well. So, what I'm sharing with you today will help you do both of those things. So, the solution to all of these challenges that I've been describing today is learning to make what you do scalable. So, this is the solution to the burnout, the lack of clarity, and the challenge of not having capacity to figure out how to free up space in your schedule to do any kind of collaboration or strategic planning about how to get it done is to make what you do scalable. Defining containers that ensure your system is addressing important linguistic components that will support spoken and written language. So you've got definitions that make sure aligned with research and curriculum, but also help you explain your process to others. So what are they? Well, this is the process that I came up with when I was in graduate school, figuring out what are those key components that help me create a system for supporting vocabulary. If you're familiar with the science of reading, this is what people often refer to as that upper strand of the reading rope. So if you are a speech pathologist, really this framework is designed to be done in conjunction with a robust reading curriculum. So we're not teaching reading here. What we're doing is we're supporting a lot of those skills that are going to help students globally across the curriculum access what they need in order to be successful. And this can be reading, it could be other communication skills in the classroom as well. So when we're thinking about what those containers are, our big, broad container is vocabulary. And then there are 5 linguistic components that fit under it. So when I say vocabulary, obviously we're not talking about just drilling and memorizing words. We are talking about building that robust knowledge that's going to support things like high-level comprehension and processing. So let's talk a little bit about why vocabulary is that bigger container and why we break it down into these 5 areas, because really these are going to form your framework that you use to determine what tools am I building for my system. And the shift that we want to make is thinking of vocabulary as simply a set of skills, because as you know, vocabulary is huge. But what we want to do when we're defining our system is thinking about it as a container that helps you highlight essentials and piece together what you're already working on and eliminate what doesn't fit. And this is an important shift because this helps you to pull in important skills like metacognition and self-questioning and a lot of things that are going to support working memory and some of those executive functioning skills while you are building language skills. So that way you're hitting multiple components. So it's not just about what you're teaching, but how you're teaching it. Part of the reason why vocabulary is such a powerful container is because without that adequate word and sentence comprehension, students are unlikely to respond to higher level comprehension instruction, especially if you're doing those comprehension strategies like stating the main idea and inferencing, which of course are important things for students to be working on and for them to be able to do. But if we don't address the underlying vocabulary issues, comprehension challenges will persist. And there's a robust body of research that supports this. So if you've been focusing a lot on the WH questions and the comprehension and asking your students a lot of questions and they just don't seem to be able to process what you're saying and then formulate their thoughts to be able to give you a response and explain past experiences and narratives, a lot of times it is tied to issues at the word and sentence level. So addressing vocabulary as a core framework for language is often that missing piece that a lot of clinicians have when they come into my program. So I'll very quickly go through those 5 containers. So we want to think about vocabulary as the broad umbrella. And then we're going to, as we are thinking about filling our containers with assets, we want to make sure that all of those things that we're creating hit these 5 components in some way. So it's not a one-to-one correspondence kind of a thing where you fill your phonology bucket and your morphology bucket and your orthography bucket. A lot of times you're addressing more than one linguistic component at once. But what you want to do over time is make sure that the assets that you're building cover these 5 components comprehensively. So you might have some that address phonology, morphology, orthography. You might have some that really hit semantics. You might have some that hit semantics and syntax. But what you want to do over time when you're done is make sure that your system addresses these components in some way. So the reason that we have phonology as a container under vocabulary is because phonological skills are a cognitive linguistic skill that is going to impact word knowledge. Also, you know this already, but it's also going to impact things like decoding and writing. It impacts vocabulary because we need to be able to produce and recognize words when we hear them. We need to have a phonological representation of words. So we need to understand those sound units and how they fit together to make meaning. When we hear sound units together, we recognize that that's a word that has meaning behind it. We also recognize that those individual sound units can impact meaning. Sometimes when we change a sound in a word, it makes it turn into another word that has different meaning. So we have to understand those smaller linguistic units. And of course, that's going to have an impact on word decoding and writing as well. And then we also want to consider orthography, being able to recognize and produce words in print with automaticity, which obviously has a big impact on writing and spelling, but also has an impact on word knowledge because the way things are spelled, when you think about the spelling of words, it does give you information about meaning, especially if you think about word parts, prefixes, and affixes, or sometimes the spelling of a word can impact its meaning and can have an impact on the way that you pronounce it. So that's what I mean when I say that these linguistic components impact each other. Typically, when you're working on phonology and you're pulling in the print symbols, which is a good practice to do, you're also working on orthography at the same time. So those skills are going to be things that impact word knowledge. So again, they fit under that broad umbrella of language and vocabulary knowledge. And again, we can also pull in things like metacognition and self-questioning and the way that we work on these skills so that we're embedding some of those higher level critical thinking, metacognition, executive functioning skills as well. And then we also have morphology. So you're seeing how these things are building on each other. We need to develop knowledge of those linguistic units that make up words, affixes, the roots and bases. All of these things are going to impact how the word is spelled, how the word is pronounced, which again, we're talking about phonology and orthography here, but when we think about those bigger linguistic units, those morphemes, we are now talking about morphology. Those are also things that are going to impact word knowledge that you're going to want to make sure that you embed into your strategies that fill those clinical containers. We have other important skills. So, obviously, semantics, those word attributes and how they tie to word meanings. This can have a big impact on things like word retrieval and how words are organized. So we want to be addressing those semantic features in our vocabulary intervention. I have some really powerful strategies that I use that embed a lot of self-questioning and reflection, which, as I said before, really supports those metacognitive skills. So it's not just about what we're teaching, but how we're teaching it as well, so that you can teach students self-awareness and improve their independent word learning while we're working on specific target vocabulary. So semantics is something that we want to make sure that we are embedding as well when we come up with our strategies that fill our containers and create our system. And then finally, something that I didn't initially think was part of vocabulary, we have syntax. So when I first started working on syntax, I would just kind of expand and extend and correct when students would make syntactic errors, but we need a more robust system than that. We need to strategically support students with the sentence structures they don't have, because knowing how to string words together is part of your vocabulary knowledge. It's not just about the content words, it's about the function words in the sentence, not just what words mean, but also what words do. If students do not have the ability to put complex clauses together and understand those complex syntactic structures, it's going to be difficult for them to produce them. So they're going to just default to a lot of those simpler sentences and have a difficult time communicating complex thoughts in both spoken and written language, but they're also going to have a difficult time processing when other people use those complex sentence structures. So this is often tied to a lot of the comprehension problems that we see. And again, if students have working memory issues and if they're struggling with executive functioning, they might not know where to look for the important information in a sentence. So that's why we have to teach them what information in a sentence is important to look at and how to make sense of sentence structure. So that's why syntax also goes in that vocabulary scalable container. And when we use these 5 components and we make sure that we're strategically addressing them over time when we build our clinical assets and our system, what we have is a very robust system for language therapy that we can use for our direct intervention, but also that we can use to define and share with other people. So this work can be done in classrooms and potentially the home as well, if we find a way to simplify what we're doing enough that someone else could repeat it outside our sessions. The good news is that when you have your clarity in your system, it frees up a lot of mental bandwidth so that work is more enjoyable. This is Michaela, who went through Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, where I teach these 5 components. I also give you a set of strategies that you can use to start creating those assets and protocols. Michaela found that what she used to find stressful actually became her passion, because again, when you go through that learning curve, that can create that passion because you feel satisfied with what you're doing. Now let's move on to the next practice, which is stacking, where you strategically stack assets, habits, and practices to fill your clinical containers. So first, we have to define what those containers are. Then you need to have at least some kind of a fleshed out set of strategies that you can use to start really defining what your protocols are. So that is what I give you in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations. I do actually show you the step-by-step protocols and give you some very basic materials to start off with. But then we need to customize how you're going to implement them specifically with your caseload and how you're going to create your tools that you would use in your sessions to fully implement those processes or potentially share them with other people. So The $1 million question is, how the heck do we make time for that? And how do we fit this in to a system that really wants you to be in that direct therapy model and can seem a little rigid? Well, that's why we use stacking. Okay, so why is it sometimes hard to get past that point of going back to the default planning session to session? Well, part of it is the system, but part of it is because a lot of really talented clinicians really enjoy direct therapy. Shocker, right? It's what you wanted to do for your job, and you enjoy doing that part. And that's totally normal. Part of this is because you might just like it. Part of it might be because it's where you feel comfortable in that direct treatment model, which is totally normal and reasonable. But also, sometimes what happens, especially if you're creative and you like kind of iterating and coming up with new ideas for therapy, is that you get stuck in what I refer to as the iteration spiral, which is where you have this one system or strategy and you never get to the point of defining and packaging it and moving on to the next and layering that next tool on. People who are creative need bumpers because a lot of times if you get ideas, you want to act on them and you want to keep tweaking and playing. There's an endless amount of worksheets and apps and new initiatives thrown at you, or ideas that you get, or things that people ask you to do. So it can be really hard to figure out when I am creating these assets, how is it defined so that I know when it's done enough that I can move on to the next one and start stacking the next thing? You also may be in the iteration spiral if people might tell you that you're really smart and thank you for your suggestions when it comes to language, but they don't actually follow through. A lot of times people will tell you that you're really smart if they don't understand a lot of what you're saying because maybe you're being too technical or you're not explaining in a way that they know what to do with it. And some other downsides are that you might overcomplicate things for yourself and for others, and you're constantly tweaking, and it really feels good enough to be able to share with somebody else or to know that you can move on and start working on the next thing. And it can lend to potentially getting stuck in analysis paralysis, getting burnt out because you've been working on something for so long and you don't feel like you have a good endpoint. And when it comes to creating a full system, if you get stuck in one phase, then you might just stop instead of moving on to the next. So you can go into that stop and start cycle that I talked about at the beginning, where you're like, this is the year I'm going to figure out language therapy. And then you get excited about something, get sucked into the iteration spiral, and then stop without really completing the full system. Again, totally normal, happens to a lot of people, but let's figure out how to get you out of this pattern. Well, the clinical containers are part of it. They give you those containers that help you be creative and move forward because they give you bumpers or parameters. But also, you need a way to build this system slowly and consistently over time so that changes stick. A lot of times when I share the system with people, they get really excited about it and they think they need to go nuclear. And that's a term that people use when people want to just blow up their entire system and change everything at once. And that leads to the stop and start cycle or analysis paralysis. So it could either lend to feeling overwhelmed because creating a new system seems like so much work that you don't get started and you're not really sure what the next step is or how to move forward strategically. And it could also result in you stopping and starting if you try to do too much at once and overwhelm yourself and then just burn out. So we need to build slowly and consistently, and that's what stacking helps you do. What you do is you learn to work in a way that helps you move forward in a system that never calms down. Because how many times have you said, I'll catch up on my PD and figure this out when I'm on break? But then when you're on break, you actually need a break. And it takes you so long to get started that you don't finish whatever you were doing. And before you know it, the break is done. So what you want to do instead of waiting for the perfect time, is commit to creating one small manageable change at a time in a way that is sustainable for how your schedule works usually, not how your schedule works on the perfect week when you have an unlimited amount of time. So what we're doing is that you are finding protected time, which you create with your master plan, which is essentially going to be the first thing you do. That's the next practice that I'm going to talk about. But what we do is we carve out that protected time and we use that time for developing assets. That's where we're going to create one piece of the system at a time. And then when we create one thing, we're going to stack the next thing. So here is an example of how that could look for a language therapy stack. Now I have two stacks right next to each other because there's a couple ways this could work. You could start with the one on the left and build all of those things and then start another stack and move on from there. Or sometimes people can do stacks simultaneously. So, for example, I might be stacking in my work and then I might be stacking in my workout plan, what I'm doing in my personal life. So, you could be stacking in multiple areas of your life at once, or you might have two concurrent efforts going on relating to work at one time. So you might be defining things in your direct therapy session, but then you also have some workflows that you're developing relating to collaboration. So obviously being able to do multiple stacks at a time is something that is more sophisticated, that takes you some time to figure out because you need more protected time to work on those different things. But this is the concept in a nutshell. So, for example, what you could do is first you carve out some time to just create your long-term strategic plan for what protocols am I going to build this year? You got to start with the plan first before you can actually implement the plan. So that's why we start with that master plan. And then within that protected time that you blocked out on your master plan, you're going to start stacking your protocols. So the first thing you might do is do your PD. So learn what your semantic protocol is. That's where you're doing your research and learning and planning. And then you can start to the pilot phase where you're actually implementing what you just learned and maybe pulling in some peer support or whatever you need to do to iterate. And you develop your protocol. And you could start with your direct session. Then you have that protocol defined. You can be implementing it with your students. It's taking you less time to implement because you've got it mapped out. Then you use your protected time to develop your next protocol. So first, you might be learning your next protocol and start layering on top of it. Then you can start to pilot the next protocol. So you're already implementing the first one because you've got that well defined. It doesn't take you as much time anymore. And then you're piloting a new one on top of it. So you're layering on top of your protocol. And then you can simply repeat this process over and over again, where you have a learning phase, then you have a piloting phase, and then you move on to the next protocol. And if you stick with this process over time, you're going to have a complete system eventually that fills all of those containers. Now, can you come back and tweak something that you've created before? Absolutely. That's what you decide in your master plan. And then the $1 million question of how do I have time for collaboration? Well, on the left, I'm more focused on direct therapy, but what you can also do with that protected time is coming up with protocols that you can use with other service delivery models. So again, you can use this stacking technique to layer different things on top of each other. So maybe first you focus on direct intervention, but when that's pretty built out and not taking you as much time, then you can move on to other service delivery models. And this is where you can start pulling in allies. So you can start collaborating with people. So sometimes your protected time could be collaboration time with other people. So maybe you're planning a semantic and syntax protocol with a classroom-based version that you can share with teachers. Maybe you're doing that by yourself. Maybe you're doing that with a teacher. And so you can use that same concept to implement different service delivery models. So you can see how that stack can work. So the way that I support clinicians is that I share the core strategies that ensure those clinical containers are full. So I teach this essential 5 framework that embeds things like metacognition and self-questioning so that we're hitting those critical thinking skills in the way that we're building vocabulary. And I'm ensuring that you are covering those 5 linguistic components. And I also give you some tools in order to implement them. But using this stacking concept, you can iterate and add to what I've given you. Again, there's not a one-to-one correspondence between your clinical containers and those habits and tools that you stack. But the most important thing is that over time, you can make sure that you're addressing those key areas. And the other thing that I wanted to mention relating to this stacking concept is that you can stack materials and protocols. So you can actually create stuff, but you can also stack habits. So things that you want to do more often. You can also stack relationships. So that protected time can be used for outreach and consultation as well. So you have flexibility to stack in a way that makes sense for you based on the way your caseload is, based on the way your team is structured, and who you might want to collaborate with. So I wanted to share a couple students that have gone through language therapy advanced foundations. They've also been on my podcast, De facto Leaders, where you can listen to a more extended conversation about how they've been able to leverage this concept of clinical containers and assets. So Katie, she was able to define those semantic protocols and layer onto her knowledge that she had from working with adult cognition. So she transitioned over to the schools and she was able to create some robust clinical protocols and iterate on what I was able to give her so that she had a system for supporting those important language and cognitive skills to understand how she could support both things like language and executive functioning in a way that was efficient. And then Amy was able to use this framework for improving her direct intervention, but also layer in multiple service delivery models. So she's created versions that she's used to train teachers and get into classrooms as well, starting with direct intervention, starting with the core framework, but she was able to leverage it for other means as well to share her clinical knowledge and make sure that she was supporting students beyond those direct therapy sessions. So now let's move on to the third practice. How do you find time to get all of this stuff done? Well, you develop your master plan that creates that protected asset and habit building time. You don't wait for the space to come, you create it now. So when we think about layering these 3 practices that we've talked about today, first we define those clinical containers so you know the what. What are we building? Then we use stacking. So you have the how. How do I build this system over time in a way that is sustainable? And then you create the master plan so you know the when. When am I creating all of these tools? So here's how it works in a nutshell. It's pretty simple, but it's very powerful. Most people start from what am I doing this week? So they start with that to-do list, which is really that 2-week task list on the right there. But what you want to do instead when you create your master plan is start with that 12 to 18 month plan. So essentially what you do once you define those clinical containers is that you figure out how you're going to design assets over the next 12 to 18 months. So again, you want to think about what your plan is over the next year, whether you want to really focus on streamlining the direct intervention that you're doing so you can get to the point that you can layer in things like collaboration, or do you want to start layering collaboration this year? Well, that's what you define in your 12 to 18 month plan. So you divide up the next 12 to 18 months into quarters, and you have a big picture goal that you want to achieve each quarter. So you keep this relatively high level so that you know what you're doing for each quarter. Again, this is something that can be adjusted along the way, but the important thing is that you want to know where you're going long term. Then we zoom into the 90-day plan, the present 90 days, and this is where we want to get it a little bit more fleshed out and determine what you're doing each month. You can make a lot of headway with that 90-day plan. Really, if you were going to just implement one piece of the process, it would be starting with that 90-day plan. I do recommend going 12 to 18 months out, but the 90-day plan, starting with that, can be a game changer for people because it helps get you beyond the immediate and focus more on the long term. And it is not so far in advance that you are planning for things without all the information that you need. So that 90-day chunk is where you're going to define what your next 90 days looks like, what you want to accomplish this quarter. So you can get a little bit more fleshed out and specific in the present 90 days. You can keep it a little more high level for those 90-day blocks that are further in the future. And then you can break it down to the 1 month plan. So, what are you going to do for each of the weeks in the coming month? And then you go to your 2 week task list. And this is where you're going to take the next 2 weeks and block down the action steps that you're going to take for the next 2 weeks. And this is really your to-do list. And this is where you're getting into your specific calendar. You can obviously use a calendar for all of these plans, but you really want to be looking at your calendar when you're doing your 2 week task list and coming up with your action items that you're doing every single day for the next 2 weeks, because you want to factor in when you're going to do that protected time. And the important thing is that you have your 12 to 18 month plan so you know your long term goals, so you know exactly what to slot into that protected time, and you put it into your to do list first. And then you fit the other urgent priorities that come up around it. You can also factor in just daily routines that you have to do, but the most important thing is that you have to plan that protected time, starting with the 12 to 18 month plan so you know what that protected time should look like, and then zooming into what do I actually have to do tomorrow. When you take the time to do this in advance, it eliminates those time blocks where you have this frantic feeling of, I've got to get something done. What should I do? And then you end up not using the time wisely because you don't have that clarity. If you don't have to make a decision about what your protected time is supposed to be used for, then you can get started right away instead of fumbling around wondering what you should be doing when you actually do get a free time spot. This is Jennifer. She was an experienced SLP when she came into Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, and she found that learning this entire system helped her to love her profession even more. So, if you love being an SLP, you love being a clinician, but you want to take it to that next level, having these practices in place, knowing what your system is, and knowing how to strategically stack those assets can be a game changer for you, because you can see your students thrive even more than they would have before. And just some other examples from my life. All of these things I'm sharing with you, they're not just about your work, they're about your life. I use this stacking concept and master planning to plan my entire life. And this is how I have time to do other things that are important to me. I'm a runner, and my husband and I like to do hikes, and I also like to lift. And so I like to make sure I get my workouts in so that I don't lose my mind. And if I don't know exactly what I should be doing during all of my time blocks during the day, it's really hard to get everything in. And then this is something that I have worked a lot on over the last year or so, is that I don't just block out protected time for work. I block out protected time for relationships and leisure time, because historically I've not been great about that. But it is really important to make sure that you're fitting all of those important activities in. So when you're doing your 12 to 18 month plan, don't just block out what you want to do for your language therapy system. Factor in your entire life. So to make this happen, we define the what, which is defining your clinical containers. Then we define the how. How do we get this done? And the way that we make sure that we have time to build those assets is by developing the master plan that carves out that protected time. Now, the reason that you might have not figured this out yet, despite all of your knowledge and skills, is because there's a lot of things that go on under the surface that make it possible to have a complete language therapy system. So I want to close that gap. So typically what people see or what they envision is they want their students to have strong relationships. They want them to have those strong comprehension and math skills and have those strong literacy skills. That's really our end goal. We know where we want to take our students, and we also know what we want our life to look like while we get them there, but we don't quite have the path. There's a lot of different tools that we would need to support in the asset building time. So work on isolated definition syntax, semantic features, embedding semantics with metacognition, understanding how this works with goals, data, and evaluation. How do we layer in things like self-questioning and generalization? What's our overall plan for how we fit all of these strategies together? And then also, I get a lot of questions about how do we embed things like phonology and word study and layer in morphology and orthography and pull all of these features together so that we know that we are filling our clinical containers. Well, these are the protocols that I use that I support SLPs with to start getting some of those assets and habits in place, which is why I wanted to extend the invite to you now to join me in Language Therapy Advanced Foundations to put these practices in place. Language Therapy Advanced Foundations is my online program that gives SLPs a scalable framework for language therapy. So I've essentially started that asset building process for you. So you have some things that are already made, but then you can take them and figure out how to implement them with your caseload. I do walk you through a lot of it. There's a lot of how to, but the important thing is that it allows you to customize because this is designed to be implemented with a K through 12 caseload. So these core practices help you make it appropriate, whether you're working with a kindergartner or whether you're working on it with a 12th grader. So the first thing that I show you in the program is that concept of scaling, where I show you the 3 steps to scaling your clinical expertise, how to clarify your systems so that you can start delegating and move from being a great technician to a leader in your current role without having to change your job title. But of course, if you are interested in moving on to another role, like being an administrator, it will set you up for success in that role as well. Then I move on to the success path, which is really the overview. And I lay out that path of strategies that you will be implementing, which is going to really help you with designing your master plan so you know what's coming in the year ahead. So that success path module gives you the overview of how you can sequence all the strategies together that I'll be teaching you that are going to fill that essential 5 set of containers. So in the success path module, I'll share how you can identify those high impact activities, how you can differentiate your expertise from other professionals, and also how you can embed metacognition into your sessions so that your students are becoming independent. So this is where we really embed some of those things like executive functioning so that students can learn words on their own when they leave your sessions. This concept of stacking and the success path has been a game changer for a lot of SLPs because it's given them that sequence of how to cycle through language activities in their sessions so that they know that they're hitting everything. This is what Jennifer had to share, is that she never really had that sequence when she was in graduate school, but having things sequenced out together so she knew how to cycle through techniques was really a game changer for her. So the first 2 modules that get into the actual therapy techniques are the semantics and definitions modules. So this is actually modules 2 and 3 of the program where I teach you how to do semantic study to boost word retrieval and also pull in definition syntax, which is a key metacognitive component that helps students to not just memorize word definitions, but also understand what information to look for so that they can improve storage and retrieval. I teach you that method for improving word recognition and retrieval, get students excited about learning words, and help them to problem solve so you're not just rote memorizing. This is Connie, and she was actually an experienced SLP when she came into the program, but she spent a ton of time planning for sessions, and she was able to help her students to bring vocabulary to sessions that they wanted to study. So she had a high school student who was kind of bored with therapy, and the student became very engaged. And she also had some students start generalizing syntactic structures when she started to work on some of the frameworks. But most importantly, she was able to cut down on her planning time without sacrificing quality. I actually share my conversation with Connie on episode 221 of De facto Leaders if you want to listen to a little bit more. So, in addition to the semantics and definitions module where I pull semantics and syntax together, I also have a module that's specifically focused on syntax to work on those challenging sentence types that cause all kinds of issues with working memory and processing, so we can really support those high level linguistic skills that are going to support expression and comprehension. So in this module, I'll focus on how to select syntactic intervention strategies that are most likely to result in transfer and how to center your sentence level work around four specific syntactic structures that are going to build that foundation, as well as how to build those robust comprehension skills in a 40-minute session for syntax. Again, we cycle through these techniques, but I show you how the cycle would work when you are specifically focusing on syntax. This is Tiffany, and she went through the program, again, was also on the podcast talking about her experience with both the semantics and syntax protocols. But a lot of times people think about syntax as more of an academic skill, but it's quite important for life, for the workforce, and a lot of adult skills that you need. Tiffany actually used some of the syntax strategies to help one of her students pass the driver's test, which tends to be very challenging for students with developmental language disorder and other neurodevelopmental disorders that we may support. And then I also give you the word study module, and this is where we focus on filling the bucket for things like morphology, phonology, and orthography. So here is where I give you those linguistic skills that support vocabulary, but also can support spelling instruction. So how to increase automaticity with spelling and decoding by studying those word parts. And also this will help you to build those grammar skills as well by focusing on those specific parts of words and pulling together phonology, morphology, and orthography. This is Jessica, and she loved pulling in both syntax and morphology, and she was able to do some specific work both on clauses and grammar and help her students, even those students who were struggling, be excited about working on morphology and syntax. A lot of SLPs worry that it's not going to be engaging for students, but you will find when you keep things simple and help students to experience success, they actually enjoy learning without you having to add a million reinforcers and devices and make your sessions super overstimulating. They can get excited about learning when you help them to feel like they can do it. And then finally, I show you how to pull it together and start to work on some of those high level strategies in the generalization module. So we scale, we get the high level success path, we work on semantics, then we work on definition syntax, then we work on syntax, then word study, and then we pull it all together and work on some of those high level cohesion skills, inferencing, questions in that generalization module. So here's where I show you how to pull in some of that work that you're doing on WH questions, listening skills, how to pull in some of those specific linguistic components, and transition from that word and sentence level work that you might be doing to some of those comprehension strategies to facilitate that skill transfer, which is really important for coming up with a version of this that is doable in a classroom eventually. This is Wendy. Again, she was an experienced SLP, but when she got this complete system, she was finally able to make language therapy make sense because she had a set of concrete strategies. And then, as you know, when you're stacking assets, we can't just think about therapy, we have to think about our other workflows. So that's why I also give you the Spot Productivity Guide that helps you to streamline goals, paperwork, evaluations, and curricular alignment with this framework. One thing I wanted to share, you do not have to completely rewrite all your goals and IEPs before implementing this framework, because all we're doing is making tweaks to the strategies that you're using to target the goals that you're already doing. But over time, you do want to tighten up your goals and your evaluations, and you want to have an ongoing process for doing that. That's what I help you do with the Spot Productivity Guide, where I show you how to align with the curriculum. I give you strategies for collecting and summarizing data, as well as a guide to writing goals using this framework. So we're using our brain to come up with goals, not AI. I'm not against using AI for certain things, but you want to have that core set of strategies in your head, because when you do, goal writing becomes a lot more seamless when you're not reliant on those other things. And you'll actually realize that it's quite simple once you understand how all the pieces fit together. Then, of course, I give you tools. So, like I said, I am no fluff with my materials, but you still need a set of protocols to capture what you're doing. And I give you all of those things that you need to do in order to get started. One of those robust tools is the Ultimate Syntax Protocols that you can use to implement the syntax strategies that I teach you, to have a bunch of probes that you can use to know what skills to target while you're working on syntax. And then I also have the same concept for morphology and word study with the word study toolkit, where I give you a set of words and probes that you can use to target those important word parts. So this outlines things like prefixes, affixes, meanings, as well as some of those multiple meaning words as well. And then, of course, this is a fan favorite, the definitions and syntax strategies. And then I also have the WH questions guide, which dives into the vocabulary and syntax of questions. So this is something that we're using to bridge that sentence and word level work to those higher level tasks. And then finally, there is a members Q&A area where you can ask me questions. So there's a comment section below any of the videos in the online portal, and you can ask me questions in that section about anything in the program. And then I also have a very robust library of past Q&A sessions and recordings where you can see past member questions. Chances are, I've been running this program long enough that your question has been answered in the past. So you can either view those past Q&A sessions or submit a question for me to answer about a complex case if you're struggling. You're seeing the total value of the program add up. I am not going to charge you anywhere near that amount today, but this is just, you can see how it would work if I did split these things out into separate products, but that's why I've got it all together for you in one program. So obviously, when I thought about how to design language therapy advanced foundations, I could have offered you more lesson plans and asked you to show up to a traditional professional development seminar, which I'm not against, by the way, but often they need to be stacked with other ongoing learning, which is exactly what I do. I could have also bombarded you with tons of materials and overcomplicated it, which materials are great, don't get me wrong. I am all about you having the materials that you need, but it is possible to have too much stuff. You need to be able to organize what you have in order to package and scale it. Because remember, if your system is not simple enough that you could explain it to other people, you're not going to be able to scale it and make yourself more efficient and effective and share your amazing expertise with other people. So the other option is that I could create some bumpers for you and deliver this all in one concise container and only include the materials you need to get started so that you can start building the habits that are going to support the development of your robust language therapy system. And then, of course, to consume the information when it's convenient for you so that you can stack in a way that aligns with your mastered plan. So I offer this in an on-demand format, so there's no intricate scheduling required. You can design your own protected time and learn this information at a pace that's convenient for you and get support from me along the way. So that's why I'm so excited to invite you to join Language Therapy Advanced Foundations. You can join Language Therapy Advanced Foundations today for either 3 payments of $197, or you can pay in full for $497. So as a bonus for attending today, if you join this week, I will add the founding members master calls bonus. And this is where I did some live Q&A sessions and recorded them with the first round of members in the program, where I was developing this system. So you can see all the questions that they asked that led to the development of the system. People find these calls really helpful because a lot of times all of you have very similar questions and are going through similar challenges. So that's why I wanted to offer that bonus to you for attending today. So there should be a link that popped up that goes to the enrollment page with all the information. There's frequently asked questions on that page, but also you can email me at drkarenspeech@gmail.com if you have any other questions. But first, if you have a question, make sure that you click through to that page and scroll down to the frequently asked questions section, because chances are your question will be answered there about how the program works, if you can track professional development hours, what's included, all of those things. And also, if you do have a question about getting a purchase order, if you are at a school district, please email me. I am happy to explain that process to you. When you join, you get lifetime access to all program features. So this is not a subscription. It is a program with a one-time tuition. So once you pay in full, so you either complete your payment plan or you make the one-time payment. If you're taking the pay in full option, you get lifetime access to all the program features. So that includes the modules, the materials, and the place that you can go to leave comments. That means you can work through at your own pace. Like I said, the master plan involves implementing a 12 to 18-month goal. So yes, you can make a ton of progress in the next couple months, but the most important thing is that you don't have to get it done in the next couple months. You can continue to use this process and have access to everything over time. Language Therapy Advanced Foundations is different because other programs focus on lesson plans, which again has some value, but no one else shows you how to make them scalable and stack and layer so that you can design your robust system and position yourself as a leader on your team so you can start leveraging other service delivery models and addressing generalization, and start addressing some of those systemic issues that might be driving you crazy. So you have several choices. You can hope that the other people interacting with your students will figure out how to scaffold as well as you do. You can continue to wait for those systemic problems are fixed or for your schedule to calm down, or you can join me and create the systems and the habits that make those limitations irrelevant. And then, of course, you get those founding members master calls when you join this week. All you need to do is click through on that enrollment page and you'll get all the information you need to become a member. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, you can email me at drkarenspeech@gmail.com if you have any questions, but I hope to see you in the members area so that I can show you how to design that scalable language therapy system that helps you support your students and helps you to be that leader that you have always been capable of. As always, thank you again for joining me and for all that you do for your students.